This is a production of Cornell University.
Thank you. So with that, last time, indeed, I discussed more the public-private social sector collaboration. Also in another seminar, we discussed scenarios for the 2025 plus COVID world. And today I actually tried to bring a bit together thinking at CIMMYT related to agricultural focused climate change, but especially because I want to invite Cornell and the school to discuss with me, but also with CIMMYT scientists, can we push the envelope of what agriculture can actually do for climate change? How can agriculture play a role to become the solution, and how can we reduce it as being a problem? So what I'm trying to do with the seminar today is probably provoke a little bit of showing you where we are at CIMMYT, but I would like you to if you allow, to give me later on the gift and CIMMYT the gift of saying, okay, what do you think? What can we do together to really push this more aggressively and way more push the envelope of climate change in the nexus of agriculture? So hopefully we can have that conversation in the future live encounter. So to get started, obviously what we will be talking about is the nexus between climate change and food production. Agricultural systems are extremely sensitive to climate change on the one end, extreme weather, higher temperature. They are highly dependent on stable long-term conditions that determine productivity, quality of the output, and yields. A lot of what we have been doing as agricultural researchers is driving efficiency. And I think today we need to ask the question if we should not take a more systemic look at the whole agricultural enterprise, or at that nexus between agriculture and climate change, that not only looks at efficiency, but it actually looks at systems performance, which includes resilience. And obviously also certain degrees of efficiency. Inefficient resilience is probably not that difficult, or ineffective efficiency is also not that difficult. We need resilience, effectiveness, and probably a certain degree of efficiency. Where's the balance? I don't have the response. Farmers struggle actually today to cope with increasing climate risks that affect food production, and also their capacity to, at the same time, they're demanded, they're asked for, there's pressure on our systems to meet the rising global food demands. And obviously beyond food, we probably have to, if we look at a systemic intervention, how can we have healthy, affordable, sufficient diets produced within the climate boundaries, or within this climate nexus? At the same time, we also know that agriculture does contribute a substantial amount to the climate change impact. 25% of greenhouse gases come from agricultural activities. And if we look at how that is divided, and you see a couple of other numbers here, but it all depends on how you consider certain elements. But I wanted to show here, within that contribution of agriculture and land use change, what are the elements? And if you look, there's a 13% soil fertilization. Obviously, 33% comes from ruminant production. A lot of part from manure. Obviously, also within agriculture, energy is an important factor. And then obviously rice and rice production, especially if it is rice production in flooded conditions. So the climate change challenge to food production, if I zoom it into the specialty of CIMMYT, which is wheat maize-based systems, including production of wheat and maize, but also beyond. We look at what is that pressure, and its temperature increases obviously reduce global yields of major crops. Without adaptation, each degree Celsius increase in global mean temperature would on average reduce wheat yield by 6% and maize yields by 7.4%. And we see that in our research site in Ciudad Obregón, that if we plot yields and night temperature, we see a direct relation between night temperature in critical periods and the reduction of the yields on average in the valley. And sustainable intensification to close yield gaps leads to a loss of biodiversity in landscapes and an increased pressure on natural diversity. And I will come back because it sits in the middle also of the debate on land sharing and land sparing. And agriculture needs biodiversity if we look at the element of resilience towards the future. So right now, where is CIMMYT focusing as we speak? We are focusing on extensive research on climate change adaptation and mitigation in maize and wheat-based production systems across Africa, Asia, and Latin America. Here, I want to do a shout out of a lot of collaboration with sister centers in the CGIAR system. You may have heard from CCAFs, you may have heard, which is the climate change effort. You may have heard certain seminars on food security, but also in general security and climate change. Climate change focused research aims to help smallholder farmers to adapt to climate shocks and to raise and maintain yields profitably and reduction of greenhouse gas emissions. So this is basically where we focus today. What I would like to do with this presentation is later on that you provoke us to maybe think different or add or focus on additional research elements that we should be together focusing on. And what are the outputs of those research lines related to climate change? New and high yielding heat and drought tolerant maize and wheat varieties. As many of you know, 70% of the wheat varieties globally come from the effort in collaboration with multiple partners, including US universities. Of course, Cornell related to UG99 rust diseases come from CIMMYT and its network efforts. Also maize, 50% in the developing countries. The maize sown in the developing countries comes from CIMMYT's breeding programs. So if we in that breeding effort standard include heat and drought tolerance, which we have been working on, then of course that would be a huge impact globally on the adaptation towards climate change. Also, we look at conservation agriculture-based farming practices that increase nutrition and water use efficiency to reduce water, fertilizer, and energy consumption. A lot of energy in agriculture goes into chemical fertilizer. And last but not least, we have done a huge effort related to monitoring, evaluation, accountability, and learning systems and tools that publicly funded researchers and field technicians throughout our programs in Mexico, but also Latin America, but also Africa, South Asia. We offer them systems to capture those data in order to then do analytics, thinking that crowdsourced, that kind of citizen science or that kind of farmer science will help us to get to the granularity of systems understanding that we need for interpretations towards resilience of those systems. Now, if you look at global impacts, if we can do something with those current activities to make them more climate resilient, to make them more climate adaptive, does that actually make sense? And yes, it does. CIMMYT generates today benefits of between $3.5 to $4 billion annually for maize and wheat, for the maize and wheat systems. Unfortunately, this doesn't go back to CIMMYT. It is well, unfortunately, probably fortunately, it goes back to the system, to the overall production efforts. 50% of maize and wheat in the developing world is based on CIMMYT varieties. 60% actually of the wheat acreage planted in the United States uses CIMMYT related wheat varieties. And over 80 million farmers are benefiting through improved maize and wheat system farming practices. So if we could find a way to have impact on those elements, I think we could actually have huge impacts. If we want to reduce climate greenhouse gas emissions, we need to do it at scale to really move the needle, but also imagine if we can improve the data that we get back. And I'm now already doing somewhat of a prospectus, the data we get back of those networks, what could we do with all that information? So what do we want to do more in the future? What is a little bit already future thinking? So increase maize and wheat resource efficiency, improve crops potential to adapt to climate change, but also combine genomic data from the germplasm bank. So we have a biodiversity bank where we safeguard 28,000 different maize samples, 140,000 different wheat entries. So one of the things we've been looking at is, can we map the genetic variation and then actually overlay that with where those accessions, where that biodiversity was found, in which conditions was it found, so that we can actually extract from that potential biodiversity that has adaptive capabilities for heat, drought, and cold stress, depending on where we found naturally that biodiversity, in order then to include that in our breeding efforts towards new broad adaptable varieties. And one of the new exciting endeavors in this is the use of GWAS, or the genome-wide association studies. And here I'm really on thin ice. I'm just a simple agronomist. So probably my colleagues in CIMMYT working with this and very reputed experts like Sarah Hearn can explain this way better. But it is about the genomic predictions to identify novel variations of potential value for breeding and to predict future performance of that original, of those land races, of the or the original biodiversity. So if we can go back to those original land races, and if we can project what they would mean 20 to 50 years from now within a climate change context, then actually we can use the future predictions to do something in the present, which is basically use that higher genetic value, that those that actually survive better in the world for 50 years from now can actually already be incorporated to get us prepared through the germplasm. It's kind of from the future creating the varieties of the present in a way, taking advantage of the biodiversity that's safeguarded and taking advantage of modern tools of genetic data mining. At the same time, can we advance in our agronomical practices? If we then have those better varieties, can we increase resource use efficiency to help reduce greenhouse gas emissions and adapt agriculture to weather variability? And therefore, CIMMYT has extensively researched and documented the advantages of conservation agriculture-based practices with average yield gains, with improved soil structure, and we will look a little bit more at that. What is conservation agriculture? Many of you know, a farming system that promotes zero tillage, minimum soil disturbance, maintenance of soil soil cover, or a permanent soil cover, or a crop cover, and diversification of the different plant species in the system. The advantages it has is increased water infiltration, which may lead to higher yields under drought, and at the same time reduced soil erosion, increased soil organic carbon content, and increased soil microbial biomass and fauna. As a matter of fact, we installed controlled experiments, a network of 20 research platforms. And those that remember my previous seminar know that we have a network throughout Mexico of 20 different research platforms with different research institutes that follow similar protocols, but are sitting all in different agroecologies. So here we are representing a bit, and if you know Mexico a little bit, you can go from the desert all the way to the tropical forest in one country. So those 20 research platforms are sitting in a diversity of production systems for maize and wheat. We used 3 years data, and if we look then at the soil carbon increases, you can see here on the bottom, on the horizontal axis, this is the concentration of organic matter in the conventional practice. If you look at the vertical axis, this is the organic matter concentration in conservation agriculture. If you then look at the 0 to 5 centimeter layer, you can see that in that layer, on the overall, taking all those 20 platforms, you have a higher carbon content, but even also between the 50 and 30 centimeter, even though it is less clear. So especially an increased soil organic matter in the 0 to 5 centimeter layer. But there are also, and we need to be aware of that, large variability. There is a large variability among sites. So the effects really need to be validated under local conditions. So at the same time, I want to send a word of caution that it's not just by increasing this, that it's not going to be an easy job to increase necessarily in all systems soil carbon, and that it's necessarily carbon sequestered. It's probably changing the resilience of the system, or say changing the cycling of the carbon and nitrogen cycle, and we need to look at it as a cyclic and as a systemic element. Through sustainable intensification, through those agricultural-based systems, we try to decrease the emissions provoked by maize and wheat systems, and avoid the conversion of ecosystems to agricultural activities. This since Norman Borlaug, the Nobel Peace Prize winner, that is known for saving 1 billion lives, who started the CIMMYT activities. There were talks about the Borlaug paradigm, which is basically saying if we can produce more grain per square meter, we are avoiding land use shifts that agriculture would take over ecosystems or land uses that are today used for other uses, and that on its own is an environmental service. That is obviously the paradigm of land sparing, land sharing. So land sparing, where you say if I intensify, I spare some of the land, and that has been put as opposition, and I will discuss it a little bit more, to the land sharing, where land should be shared in the activity. And as usual, in the agricultural world, you will not be surprised. We believe that the response actually started fruit actually sits in the middle. It is a combination of land sparing in a system that optimizes land sharing. CIMMYT achieves scaling and sustainable intensification practices and technologies by implementing what we call integrated programs based on compelling theories of change with multi-actors, and I will get a bit more in detail to that. Of course, those projects look at a menu of integration where we use traditional farmer knowledge combined with technologies and innovations to look at agroecologies and production systems that can achieve and preserve nature and protect biodiversity while also producing the food. So in the end, what we try to do is a demand triangulation and trade-off management, in which you have multi-objective research that no longer only looks at yield, but also looks at those other components that we want to the agricultural systems to I don't want to say produce, but to provide to us. So looking at this sparing and sharing debate, it's a heated debate, and it's more a debate under the conservation ecologists. And so we were convinced with a team from CIMMYT led by Frédéric Baudron, and I can go, for those that are interested later on, we can go more in detail, that we had to step as agronomists into this discussion of land sharing and land sparing, where the yield density relationships that are classically used by conservation agriculture is that conservation ecologists, is that if you increase relative the yield, your biodiversity density would go down. And that is so you have an overall population maximization with land sharing. That means if you share the land, that you can you get the green curve. If you do the land sparing, you get this more purplish curve between those two. But overall, as the yield increases in both systems, basically the biodiversity would go down in this model. Now, what we are saying is that we did a systematic review in Scopus in November 2020. We typed in land sparing and land sharing. We got 195 articles, of which 161 related to land sharing and land sparing, really. And 65 of them were actually reviews or essays, so more descriptive. 96 were empirical and or modeling papers. And if we look then at the number of papers that look actually in this debate at the outcome or really at what it is about, so to say, then we can see several had no indicator, was more conceptual, and others only looked at yield as a single parameter for this debate. What we are saying is that is not enough. In agricultural performance, we should not look at yield on its own. We need to look at the combination of crop yield, income, labor, and map that towards system optimization, including parameters of resilience and including parameters of biodiversity, to which we are speaking here. And where are we taking this kind of conceptual elements from? It's actually from the work that we are doing through our innovation hubs in agri-food systems, in which we have built that network, and you can see the graph here. We have built that network of research platforms. That's those 20 research platforms that that I mentioned before with the carbon data, that are then connected to what you can see here on the screen. And I'm actually looking for a potential. Let me see if I can find something where I can actually show you on the slides, but I cannot find it right now. No worries, we will do it as we are. So you can see those platforms, and then you see something called here modules. Modules are actually on-farm trials where you can side by side compare farmer practices, I would call them, maybe something the farmer was doing before and now incorporating into that new innovations, new ideas that we work out together. And from that, whatever works, we expand it into extension areas. And then on top of that, we construct this innovation network, those dots, this weird blobby thing that is on top of it is actually the network that we map of input suppliers, farmers, extension service, government agencies, output buyers, not the maize buyers, researchers. We're all moving into this knowledge system that is embedded with this on-the-ground research and results. And how does that look like in real life? It looks like this map here, where you can see we have the red dot is a leader farmer that has a module that really tests sites by site. A green dot is a test site where farmers apply some of that knowledge without doing comparisons. And then the blue dot is where, yet again, other farmers actually apply a second generation and no longer are really testing, but just in an application mode. From all those dots that represent today, those are plots in the field. All those dots represent 42,000 geo-referenced sites, co-development sites from which we get data streamed back to the data system. So now with that data, we can start looking at some of those questions that I just posed before. And if we just look at yield, already we can see that yield is not enough, because let me go from the left side. Results of that effort, an example from Chiapas, 0.9 tons per hectare, 3.8 tons per hectare, but more importantly, 3.8 tons per hectare, but more importantly, 15,000 pesos additional income, or an example here from a platform in the Central Plateau, 7.4 tons per hectare in the new innovations that were selected by farmers as most productive versus the 2 tons per hectare. But farmers don't only look at that yield output. Actually, we're also measuring what the impact is on their maize biodiversity of the practices that we are testing out. So what I'm trying to say here is that high yields may not be the primary objective of farmers. Most farms, even in the most remote areas, are connected to markets to some degree. And so there is a link between yield and profitability, although that link is not always direct. Also, labor and energy in that sense, so labor productivity may be more important than land productivity. Farmers may actually care more about the energy required per ton of crop than the ton per hectare. So many technologies may increase yields, but if they also tend to increase labor input and therefore energy, and therefore have a very different footprint on climate change, that may actually give a different preference, especially if we start now looking not only at yield efficiency, but at the overall resilience of the system. So extensification for land appropriation and speculation is a driver that may as well also drive some of the farmer decisions. So we need to look at the same time beyond the plot. If we only look in the land sharing and land sparing debate, or in this systems debate on yield at the plot as a plot level process, that would ignore the impact of that same exercise at higher scales. For example, landscape. The composition and the configuration could be more important than the farmer intensity per se, because there's other functions a farmer is looking at. Therefore, ecological land use complementation, or how do we complement land uses? And that's more the land sharing paradigm. But at the same time, if you only do the land sharing, then maybe also your output is not working. But also, if you have high production and we don't look at the impact of losses and waste, then the majority of which are occurring on the farm, agriculture and post-harvest stage in low-income countries, then again, that is a waste of energy and a reduction in resilience. So we also need to look at mechanization, but also need to look at storage as part of the overall footprint of our food production on energy use or on the climate change impact. So in that sense, CIMMYT transforms agri-food systems by trying to empower farmers to innovate in their fields and communities by testing new and traditional methods to make extension and adoption of technologies more efficient and effective, and to integrate actors in different parts of the agri-food systems network to work on climate change mitigation and adaptation. That means, yes, if we really want to move the needle, it's not only carbon sequestration, but it's also working with transport or access to market, or food reduction of food waste or storage, etc., etc. Where are we doing that? In the 3 continents. And a couple of examples: work in Africa, in Zimbabwe, for example, drought-tolerant maize yielded 600 kg more per hectare, and this translated in $250 per hectare extra income, equivalent to 9 months worth of additional food security at no additional cost. Sustainable intensification practices in that same area improved smallholder productivity with 30%. In Malawi, drought-tolerant maize varieties planted under conservation agriculture, so together the 2 interventions yielded 66% more than non-drought tolerant varieties planted under conventional tillage practices, and farmers therefore harvested more maize while spending between 35 and 45 fewer days in the field. If you go to Asia, in India, by using the happy seeder tractor instead of the conventional tillage practices, farmers are making 20% more profit, and at the same time we have reductions on burning, but it also through which they improved the quality of the air, and we are applying less fertilizer. So more than 100,000 farmers are growing wheat using innovative farm machines in Bangladesh, India, and Nepal. Climate services scientists at work in Latin America, where we have dynamic breeding practices going on, and we're developing a national seed sector that actually can promote new hybrids, and actually this also helps with biodiversity, in a sense that we're injecting new hybrid materials based on local seed companies. Same for wheat. 300,000 farmers growing rotation of crops, sustainable technologies, sustainable intensification on more than 1 million hectares in Mexico, and farmers participating in this effort had higher yields, but also higher income. And in the end, we try, therefore, to encompass the full system and to actually start not only how the food is produced, but also processed, distributed, and consumed. And if we start at the left side with healthy and affordable diets, we move through this graph to the right side where consumers are taking decisions on what they eat. So probably we need to look at right-sizing our climate-resistant systems, or our climate-smart or our climate-ready systems here in the middle, that goes from the use of biodiversity in the germplasm banks to targeted breeding, to seed systems, and input and service providers, smart technologies that supports the carrying capacity of the earth and the environment, with smart mechanization, integral fertility management, agroecology, sustainable agri practices, post-harvest and on-farm decision tools, with bi-directional support and knowledge generation, so that we get sustainable and climate resilient agri-food systems that are inclusive, that support an inclusive local development, which then goes for self-consumption for the farmer that produces, but also the surplus goes through the trade and to markets, is then going to local markets, or to national and regional markets, even global markets, to wholesale markets, to agro-industry, retail, and again back to the consumer. So there is these 2 forces here. It is mapping and visualizing a healthy, affordable diet, having it climate proof produced, but then it's also consumer decision making that needs to improve to make that work. And so underlying of this whole system is in the traceability and the sustainability indicators, so that we can actually fuel that decision making along that value chain, that we can make sure consumers make an informed decision, but also transportists or wholesale markets or etc. have the data to take that informed decision beyond yield or a logical output of their economic activity. Therefore, we need enabling policies between rural employment and public health, supported by research. We need collaborative research and the development of suitable technologies and practices, the extension systems, the food and trade regulations, and the inclusive growth. Food and trade regulations, just to take one, can actually completely destroy or can completely support the climate readiness of the rest of the system if they are in the way they're implemented. And impact through partnerships, which include obviously the private sector, and make sure that we can have scaling strategies effective. But having said all of that, let's never forget that we are at the service in the end, and that what is at the center of our and should be at the center of our decision taking is this farmer and his or her family working together to produce a healthy diet for the world. And so with that, I actually would like to conclude the seminar, not before saying what I now would like to do is pick your brains on saying, what can we actually do additionally? What can we do better? What can we do differently? And can we spark some collaboration in order to make our food systems, our healthy diets, climate ready? Thanks.
Thank you very much, Bram. That's really fantastic talk. So I'd like to take a question from the room first, and then questions from Zoom.
Okay, great. I was struck by your comment that which is close to where I'm working as well, conservation agriculture as in combination with plant breeding, that you need to actually do both and not breed for the worst soil or manage the soil for no improved germplasm. So you need to do both. And I think the same applies to food quality and nutrition and healthy gut microbiome. And so how do you do that within your organization, and how do you partner with experts from somewhere else? We had a very good talk by Roy Steiner earlier this week, who introduced a new initiative of the Rockefeller Foundation, and that was eye-opening. But it really requires this network of science and practitioners and industry that is hard to bring under one roof because everybody has their own incentives. So how do you see the role of universities in there, and how can we participate in what you are talking about?
Thanks, Johannes. And I think there's actually a few elements in what you are mentioning. So yes, I couldn't agree more that it's the combination of both agronomy and breeding that need to work together. And actually, there's an implicit element in what we're saying here, which is actually that we would no longer be actioning for masking up problems, allow me to say it like that, but to kind of say I'm breeding so the crop still survives because it's hammered by pests, so I make it resistant. That's obviously also important. Or I'm breeding for an unhealthy soil so that it can still get a little bit of nitrogen. It's rather saying, okay, let's look at it as an integral system that we want to produce certain outputs that are multidimensional. So one part of the question. Second part of the question, how do you bring that together in an organization? I don't have the perfect answer. And first of all, let me acknowledge that this presentation is actually taking ideas from scientists all over CIMMYT, and I just have the honor to bring it together in a compelling integrated element, and at the same time to develop those integrated programs, call it like that, on the ground, where you integrate all those elements. But I actually think that is part of the thinking should be that we make sure with integrated efforts that start from the outcome. So, okay, let's ask the question: what is a healthy diet for the highlands of Ethiopia? And how can we then design and work that there's a working system that can provide that healthy diet for those living in the highlands of Ethiopia? And that's probably a multidisciplinary, multidimensional strategy element. And then there's a tactical element. But then there's also a point where everybody has to go do what they are good at, right? So it's not, I don't think it is asking the teff breeder or the wheat breeder to all of a sudden know about agronomy. It is rather asking that breeder to take into account information streams, product profiles. So to look at the profile of this new crop that includes elements from social sciences, from biological sciences, and from predictive sciences. And then the third part of your questions: how can the universities work together? I see two elements: the freedom to push and try out. So really challenging what I'm presenting here by saying that there must be something more radical, more transformational that we actually can try out. And then when we try it out at the university level, then say, okay, the next step is, okay, this now works as a technology, as an innovation. Can we actually drop it into this whole innovation system and see what comes back? Can we harvest those data? But then again, we would need the smart scientists and students in the university to data crunch, to data mine, to those data that come back from the system.
Yeah, thank you, Bram. Tim?
Bram, I was really intrigued by your discussion about land sharing and land sparing. And I'm not sure I understand the concept correctly, but I was intrigued with the possibility that in land sharing, it might be possible to take a slight decrease in the total yield, but still maintain very high biodiversity. I wonder if you could just give an example of what is being considered there.
Sure. So the whole land sharing and land sparing debate is a bit of conservationist debate where you say, okay, if it's land sparing is basically say, okay, we're going to do this land use here exclusively. I don't know, conservation of the elephant. And we are going to do this land use here exclusively production of maize for those living close in the habitat of the elephant. And we're saying if you do that, actually on the one hand, that doesn't exist real land sparing, because probably when you produce maize and you do it wrongly, something is going to leak out and still contaminate the habitat of the elephant, even though you have a fence around. The other concept is obviously land sharing. Let's share the land use, but that then also means what we're saying there. That doesn't mean you don't have to optimize still for the production, and you can optimize production and you can optimize the function. Let's say that the human need function of a system while still respect the other functions of that space. We can have a more in-depth debate, but it's a bit about an example. For example, is in Mexico, we have been looking at, but same thing in Africa, we have been looking at, okay, can we set up a milpa system that, yes, sacrifice some of the yield, but then has more species output, so it maybe may result in a healthier diet, but at the same time, it is providing more habitat for more diverse population of different other species or different other animals, and therefore, can we look at that space on the earth as what it is providing for the human functions, right? Which are social functions, which are environmental functions and food production functions, but not shy away from trying to make the innovations, not having it as a museum, let's say, to safeguard it under a bubble, but still looking at, can we optimize and better integrate and still feed? We still need to feed the growing population. I hope that does respond a bit, and I will share the paper that we wrote on this matter.
Okay. Yeah, it's good. Hello.
Yes,
You're probably here now. So I'm curious how CIMMYT is interfacing with large multinational, particularly consumer-facing food and beverage companies that have pretty ambitious carbon targets, even their own regenerative agriculture programs, which sound very similar to CIMMYT's conservation agriculture programs. So yeah, I just am eager to hear more of how CIMMYT is interfacing and how those partnerships with the private sector can be facilitated and grown.
thank you. So thanks for the question. So yes, indeed, but it has been an evolution in that sense that first we set up those farmer networks. We looked at that multifunctionality. We allowed that to grow, and then we actually said, okay, we want to go from a traditional agronomy push, do conservation agriculture, use my better varieties, to kind of a pull. But at the same time, that pull then also can leverage some of the other things that we're looking for, which is that extra income, by creating a market for the grain. So very simple, asking the food and beverage companies to, instead of buying the grain in from outside and importing it, to buy it from local smallholder farmers. Now, having that said, there's obviously a reason that those companies, it's easier for them to buy a ship of homogeneously produced corn on their very intensive practices, as opposed to smallholder farmers who all do their own practices, and so it's less homogeneous, it's logistically more difficult, etc., etc. So the big question was also, how can we offset what you lose on the one end with gains on the other end? So the same system thinking, and that's where it became important to visualize the other value of that grain. So that grain has a value, so that you can transform it in a cookie, or you can transform it into a flake that you can sell. But it also has a nutritious value that we're now making visible, but it also has a climate value or a water value. And so with the data systems, we're working together with those companies to actually say, this grain has not only the value that you can make it into a flake, but if you take two of those grains, this one is produced sustainably and this one is produced non-sustainably, then choose that sustainable one, even if that costs you a bit more on the element of logistics or organization or etc. And because that's a value that you can bring to your consumer. And so those collaborations started with a couple of companies, and I can inform that they have been growing. Today we have a platform where 80% of the companies selling products in Mexico based on maize, for example, are participating. The companies participating in the platform represent 80% of all maize-based products sold in Mexico, and we are working with them to actually open those local markets, develop those markets, and bring the discussions on a leveled playing field. So that I also want to highlight, it is not about bringing farmers and companies together and then say, okay, now work it out, because they start from very different starting points, right? It is about creating the space where they can collaborate as equal partners. I hope that responded to the question. Otherwise, I mean, I can also go more in detail on that in a separate conversation.
Yeah. So
yes,
my question, because you're talking about this whole thing, the context of climate change. So how to scale this up to, from individual trials, really like small scale studies, and this individual efforts. Of course, you do a lot of collaboration and networking thing, but how to scale this up to really regional and global scale, and how that evaluation could be done?
Sure, this is a fantastic comment, and actually we're already struggling to scale it from those experiments to 300,000 farmers. So we were already proud that we overcame that scaling hurdle. We were already proud that we overcame the hurdle of getting drought-resistant maize into the hands of millions of farmers, not just hundreds. And I think your question is even more ambitious to really say, okay, how can we bring that to an even higher level, which is really the global, and this is where it plays, right? The global level, and this is, I think, where last year we have seen a couple of things where we need to learn from. Not that if one particular waterway in the world is blocked by a ship that went rogue, the whole system collapses. So talking about scaling, it seems to go very fast in a negative way, as if you have the right pressure point. I think I was jealous that we now know that pressure point. I would like to know it the other way around, not to say what's the pressure point that we can activate, to the other way around, to actually spread out in the system, so we can elevate it. Now, having that said, I do think we need to look more at very high level financial systems, looking at the financial system connected to this, looking at the social systems connected to this, and making that connection between high level decision making and low level impact. I don't have the response how to do it, but let's keep discussing and thinking about it. Maybe one comment: visualizing things, making them transparent, making them visible, putting the data, putting the light on it, already can be a change, can provoke change on its own.
Yeah, so that's actually the follow-up question I'd like to ask, the data sharing part. So you said you have like 30,000, right? Or is that number correct? But are those data available to researchers that can help CIMMYT for the scaling up effort?
Yeah, absolutely. So those data are available for multiple studies. No? So we have examples of students that looked at that database in combination with another database to look at the impact of using conservation agriculture and reduction of burning, for example, on health, on the health numbers, on blood samples taken to look at blood contamination provoked by burning. Just to give an example. So these are the kind of collaborations that actually we would be interested in to defining and saying, okay, you have this database here, you have the data analytical capabilities. Let's make a collaboration to look at that, and then be able to give recommendations to policymakers based on that research that is no longer based on the model, but based on 40,000 points in the real space with which we can do something. At the same time, we do also have dissemination systems where we send some of that information back to the farmers.
Bram, I made the comment that much of ag is large scale or quasi-industrial, much larger scale than you guys historically worked on. And my question is, are these solutions you're working on now, are they meant to apply also, at that scale as well as a smaller scale?
Thanks. Absolutely. We're looking at those solutions under the conviction that we need to look at solutions that are I don't want to say scale agnostic, but what I mean is the solution that we propose should be the combination.
This has been a production of Cornell University, on the web at cornell.edu.